this is the Egyptian queen Nefertiti, right? That's not just a pretty wild hat she's wearing. She's covering up a pretty big dome of a head. She's got one heck of a cone head going on there. She's got a real big cone head. Assuming this is an accurate likeness of the queen, the picture to the left shows a profile of Nefertiti, revealing just how incredibly large and elongated her head was. Was she born that way? Were her daughters born that way too? There's a representation of one of her daughters. We see, like on the, you see the Akhenaten on the left there holding one of his kids, and Nefertiti on the right with two of her daughters. The little baby up on her shoulder has an elongated head. Now, some people think that's just people strapping boards to their heads and stretching out their skull. Well, first of all, that's a baby right there with the skull like that. But I'm going to suggest that, yes, there are people in the world who do strap boards to their head to change the shape of their skull. But the reason why they're doing that is because they're emulating something they saw somewhere else in the distance that was distant past that was naturally that way. Like this, like this girl right here. She was naturally that way. Okay? This skull, the person who gave it to me is a friend of mine. His name is Jeff Randall. He called me up one day after doing a Google search. We hadn't seen each other or talked to each other in 5 years. He moved from Texas to New York. He's doing a Google search one day on Nephilim and sees my stuff all over the place on YouTube and everything. He's like, what in the world? I didn't know you were into this. So he contacts me out of the blue. He says, when did you get into this stuff? I said, well, I've kind of always been into it. He says, well, we got to talk. He says, I'm coming back to Dallas for a short trip. We need to hook up. So we go out to dinner, and he gives me this. He says, maybe this will help you with your research. I'm like, yeah, dude. That's a great prop, huh? He said that the woman who gave it to him had access to the original skull in Peru. This is from Peru. This is a replica of the skull in Peru. It has a completely different suture pattern on the top of its head. We have a frontal lobe right here, and then we have the two parietal lobes. This doesn't have that. It's a completely different suture pattern. Strapping boards to your head is not going to change the suture pattern. This is somebody that was born that way. This is a female skull, and you see the difference between the female skull and the more robust male skulls there. This is a artist representation of what this person may have looked like in real life. Could that have been what the wives of Noah's 3 sons looked like? Could be. These people got their genetic traits somehow passed down to them. The Egyptians were the offspring of Mitzrayim, who was an offspring of Ham. So it's possible. It shows the superimposed skull of a normal person, so you see the size of the brain, how much different it is right there. What other abilities did these people have, with a brain like that? Who knows what kind of abilities they might have had. We also see news reports coming out. This is from December. An article came out December 18th, updated on the 19th. It says the headline was, "The incredible alien skull discovered in a Mexican cemetery, a 1,000-year-old skeleton. Archaeologists in Mexico today revealed the astonishing skull of a person suffering from a cranial disfiguration." That's what it is. So, the question was, were they born this way, or was it strapping boards on their heads? Well, to answer that question, some people certainly were born this way. In this book right here, The Enigma of Cranial Deformation, you see they actually have the skull that I have right here on the front cover. David Hatcher Childress and Brian Forster wrote this book. I've actually been in contact with Brian Forster. They are doing DNA tests on these skulls. They were raising money to try to answer the question, who or what are these creatures? And they were raising money to do DNA testing, and I contributed financially towards the research. So he's been emailing me almost weekly updates on that. So they've done some preliminary tests just to make sure that DNA has not been contaminated with other people's DNA, and they've ruled that out. So that's a good sign, and so now we're eagerly anticipating the results, what they come up with. But in their book, they talk about how this individual that's quoted here discovered a mummy of a pregnant woman that had a 7-month-old fetus inside with a skull like that. So that pretty much rules out the headboard strapping thing right there. If you got a 7-month-old fetus inside a mummy of a pregnant woman, yeah, they were born that way. And here's the first Home Alone creature. Oh no! I've got a cone head! So what did the female Nephilim that got on the ark look like? I don't know. Did they look like this? The early X-Men, right? Were they just people with extraordinary powers and maybe no disfiguration at all? Could they have looked like this? I do find it interesting that this individual right here just so happens to have 6 toes. I don't know. A lot of people argue with me about this and say, Rob, that's absurd. Why would God allow Nephilim seed on the ark? I said, well, your argument's actually more absurd than mine, because I'm dealing with the root cause. You're dealing with the symptom, right? I'm saying the root cause was taken care of by God. You're saying God allowed them to just continue doing what they did before the flood, after the flood. If God wiped out the whole world because of what the Nephilim watchers did with mating with women, what was it, just a halftime show where God was cleaning off the playing field? And after it was over, okay, guys, pick up where you left off. Come and mate with the women again. No, I believe God allowed it for his own sovereign purposes to show himself to be the God of gods, Lord of lords, King of kings, right? And he got victory through his people. We're studying the book of Exodus right now, and we see over and over and over again how the surrounding nations were in absolute terror of the Israelites because of their God. And that was God's purpose, was to make himself great, make himself known, and to do so through his chosen people. We see that in Exodus. We see it in Joshua chapter 2 when the spies go into Jericho and they meet the Rahab, and she says, we're all in terror. We know all about you guys, what you guys did to Og Bashan and what you did to the Egyptians. See what God was doing? He allowed Nephilim seed to go through the ark so that he can make his people revered and known throughout all the world as the people of God, who they were. And actually, what I discovered doing, anybody ever heard of a Punnett Square in school, doing Punnett Squares? I thought, what would it be like if I did a Nephilim Punnett Square? And I thought, okay, women have 2 X chromosomes and men have an X and a Y. And if we're talking about a 50-50 hybrid, then let's say that the woman, the suspicious women as I call them, may have had 1 tainted X chromosome and 1 good one. Well, you see that when you mate with a normal male, you have a 50-50 chance of producing completely normal offspring. And I see that that's what happened in the case of Shem's offspring, for instance. I can't find any evidence of Nephilim in Shem's offspring. I see a lot of evidence in Ham, and I see some evidence in Japheth. So clearly the odds worked in different ways. And can God affect the odds? Sure he can. Anybody hear the stories of what happened after Christ in the 40 years leading up to the destruction of the temple? Things like they cast lots for Azazel. In Leviticus, it talks about when the lot comes up for Jehovah or when it comes up for Azazel, what they do with the scapegoat and whatnot. Well, for 40 years, every year it came up in the same hand for Azazel. Now, what are the statistical odds that would happen every year exactly the same way for 40 years? Clearly, God can mess with the odds if he wants to. So it appears to have an issue to do with obedience. The sins of the father are passed down to the 4th generation. Obviously, that's genetic. Something's going on there. So God can affect things. I believe that the odds were affected positively for Shem. They were kind of off and on for Japheth, and definitely negatively in Ham's offspring. But not all of Ham's offspring were Nephilim either, when you go through the scriptures. So I think that this bears that out. Whereas if you believe in multiple incursions, you've got a much bigger problem because you have an X and Y chromosome that's bad, and the odds get significantly worse. So if you subscribe to multiple incursions, you're talking about polluting the gene pool significantly worse than I am by introducing potent fallen angel genetics into the genome. And speaking of genetics, I want to go back to the animal-human hybrid thing for a minute here and talk about the post-flood accounts of chimera, animal-human hybrids, because we definitely see evidence of that. In the black obelisk of Shalmaneser III in 2 Kings, he's mentioned in chapter 17, we see this individual, Shalmaneser III. This black obelisk depicts a full-grown elephant. Note the size of its tusk. Okay, that's a full-grown elephant right there. Behind it is what looks to be a full-grown lion, except that the interesting thing about this lion is it has human hands and a human head. Could that be the lion men of Moab that we read about in 2 Samuel 23:20? Again, what if we just take the scriptures literally and look at the available evidence? And by the way, look at the size of the individuals holding the leash of the lion men. If that's a full-grown elephant, there's some pretty big dudes there walking their pet lion men. This is a Hittite carving right here of another lion-man hybrid type with eagle wings, a lion head, a human head, and a serpent tail. The Hittites, their name means the terrors. Here's another representation of artwork done by the Hittites showing satyrs, satyr-like creatures with a different variety of lion men, human bodies with lion heads. You know what's interesting when you start looking at stuff like this and you look into the Hebrew of Scripture is you see some pretty wild stuff, like when Sarah died and Abraham was negotiating for a burial plot to bury his wife. It says in multiple places that Abraham dealt with an individual named Ephron who dwelt among the Hittites. Well, the Hittites means the terrors. The Hittites are making depictions like this, and Ephron's name means fawn-like. So could it be that Abraham was negotiating with a satyr for a burial plot for his wife? Could be. There certainly is substantial evidence that would point in that direction, if we take it literally. Here's some other depictions here. The Persian Greek griffin, or the charioteer of Delphi on the right. The centaurs and minotaurs and satyrs and stuff of Greek mythology, of course. Then you have this creature right here. This is a sculpture, the ancient Etruscan Roman bronze sculpture of a chimera, known as the chimera of Arezzo. It's one of the best known examples of the art of the Etruscans. So yeah, there was definitely animal-human hybrids before and after the flood. Now, I want to differentiate the days of Noah from the days of Jared. It was in the days of Noah that Jesus said the last days would be like those days. The days of Jared were marked by the mating of angels and humans. However, it was in the days of Noah that the creation of animal-human hybrids brought about the corruption of all flesh we read about in Genesis 6:12, which ultimately led to God's judgment and the flood. If we were to take Jesus' words literally in Matthew 24:37, all we need to do is turn on the evening news. There we are seeing the repeat not of angels mating with humans as in the days of Jared, but rather the recreation of animal-human hybrids exactly as it was in the days of Noah.